Shalom, shalom, and welcome to the Genesis 49 page. Today's topic, it's going to be Sepharad or the Sephardic, history of the Sephardic Jews as you see on your screen. We're going to go over this topic and cover um, what happened to the Sephardic Jews after the Spanish and Portuguese expulsion of the Jews from those lands. Where did they go? And we're going to touch on Suriname, and we're going to touch on Jamaica and how they have a rich history of Sephardic Jewish contact. So, without further ado, let's commence. All right, first slide. Jews. A tradition exists with the Jewish community of Granada that they are from the inhabitants of Jerusalem, of the descendants of Judah and Benjamin. And that's from Rabbi Abraham ben David, and this is around the 11th and 12th century AD. And to your right, I have a picture of the Saracens. Now, the Saracens are described as non-Arab, non-Muslim inhabitants of Europe, right? And you can clearly see they're depicted as black, and the Jews also fall in that category of the Saracens because we were in those lands. We were in Spain, we were in uh, Germany, Portugal, so on and so forth. And if you read about the Saracens, a lot of iconography, especially in France, you should see that the so-called white man in the Crusades and stuff like that were fighting against these people known as the quote-unquote Saracens. If you know the history of the Jews, we fought in the Moorish armies against the so-called white man, the Caucasian, the Edomite. All right, which I have a video actually going clear. That's going to clear up that Edomite thing, so people that won't have any shadow of doubt who the Edomites are. We know they're the Caucasians. We know they're the descent from the Romans. We have historical facts and documents showing that. But that's for another time. Today we're dealing with the Sephardic Jews. And what I wanted to bring out is a tradition exists with the Jewish community of Granada that they are from the inhabitants of Jerusalem, of the descendants of Judah and Benjamin. And that quote is by Rabbi Abraham ben David. Next slide. It says 1492. In the year 1492, the Jews were forcibly expelled from Spain, which dispersed many of the Jews to North Africa, Holland, and America, and etc. Today we're going to be dealing with mostly Africa and America and bringing out the history on that. And to the right, you see Daniel in stained glass in Augsburg, Germany, 12th century. What color is he? Black. Look at his beard. He's a black man. You can see in his hand what they were actually trying to. Looks like they were trying to do some whitewashing, but they didn't finish the job. My theory is during these medieval times, medieval ages, before the Renaissance, you had a lot of wars between the Saracens and the so-called Christians, which were Edomites at this time of Europe. And when they were doing this whitewashing and everything, it had to be abrupted through war. That's just my theory, my take on it. But I'm using these images so you can get in your head what these people look like. What did the Jews of antiquity and the medieval ages look like, so you can know who these people are when they left Spain and Portugal to the Americas and to the west coast of Africa and the islands of Cape Verde and so on and so forth. All right, we're dealing with Jamaica now, and as you can see, Jews to your right is a Jew, a brother that's in Jamaica in front of Shire Shalom, which is the synagogue there. They understand they descend from Jews. To the left, you got the quote. It says, in Jamaica, there was a very large degree of Spanish and Portuguese Jews with Negroes, and today there is said to be a very large colored population bearing Jewish names. Why? Because they descend from those Spanish and Portuguese patriarchs that came from Spain, came over here, mixed with the quote-unquote Negroes, because we're going to bring out that the Spanish and Portuguese were black as well, or quote-unquote Negroes, which is just a color, it's not a race, right? So this is their posterity. But what happens is later on in history, you have the Ashkenazis coming over, which are the pale uh, Caucasian Jews you see now, they come from Khazarian descent. They're converts, come over and basically trying to rule all of the synagogues or whatnot. But this is from Maurice Fishberg, The Jews, page 149. You know, he brought out a lot of good information about the quote unquote Negro Jews and how he comes to the consensus that the Jews actually come from a Negroid or quote unquote African descent. Um, and that's where they originate from. He has a lot of good information in his book, but it's also distorted with white supremacy and uh, today's notion that the white people over there in our land are Israelites, which we know they're converts, they're fakes, they're not the real authentic Jews. With that, let's keep it moving. Again, Jews. About 150 years ago, a new half-breed colony was constituted in the neighborhood of Suriname, which was a result of intermarriage between Jews and Negroes. Maurice Fishberg, The Jews, page 149 again. So in Suriname, you have a large colony. You know, and this book was written in 1915, so you go back 115 years. What's that? 1800, set about 1750, around that era. You had a lot of quote unquote Negroes, and by Negroes he means those slaves, which could be an Indian or a slave from West Africa, Igbo, Angolian, whatever. You know, they had intermarried, and a lot of paternal passage came from that, and leniency came from that. So a lot of them understood that they were a Jew, okay, which restored them of their nationality, because a lot of our people coming off those boats, they lost their nationality, right? And we're gonna touch on that a little bit later as well. And that's also from Maurice Fishberg, and we can see Suriname, South America. To this day, they still have those brothers practicing what we call Judaism nowadays, but that comes from the Ashkenazi influence. Before then, they was practicing Israelite customs, right? So let's keep going. Now, the color of the Sephardic Jews, we just read that they came to Jamaica and they bred with the Negroes, quote unquote Negro. That's what they call the slaves. Now, we read about Suriname, how the Portuguese and Spanish Sephardic Jews came over and interbred with the quote unquote Negroes, which what they're referring to as slaves. Now, what color were these? Because a lot of people are probably watching this and you're thinking in your mind, oh, these Sephardic Jews had to be white men. Not the case. I put this in my video I done prior to this, and I put it in here because it was conducive to the topic. So let's get it in. It says, toward the latter end of the 18th century, one finds this same changeability of the Jews expressed in their updated nuances and geographic context. The Reverend Samuel Stanhope Smith wrote that the Jews are fair in Britain and Germany, brown in France and Turkey, swarthy meaning dark. To be swart means to be black. Okay, that's what it means. It means to be black. Swarthy in Portugal and Spain. So that's what we was dealing with. The Portuguese and Spanish Sephardic Jews of descent came over here and brought their seed and made families, okay, and posterity in these lands of Jamaica and Suriname. It says olive in Syria and in Chaldea, tawny meaning brown, or copper color, because when you think of tawny, you think of tan. Are copper colored like the Native Americans, and in Arabia and in Egypt, which is brown. A lot of us are tawny. A lot of people going around calling themselves Negro. You're tawny, okay? You got a brown skin, boxwood complexion, okay? So that's the color of the Jews, okay? The white ones were mainly because they had migrated to Britain and Germany. Those are those Khazarians that you see in our land today, claiming to be the real Jews, but really they're converts of the 8th century, all right? From the kingdom of Khazaria. But let's read on. Perhaps the best indication that the valences involved in such distinctions also convey metaphysical import is the title of mid-17th century English translation of conversionary tract aimed at Jews by the formerly Jewish Samuel of Morocco, the blessed Jew of Morocco, or a black Moor made white, being a demonstration of the true messiahs of the law and prophets by Rabbi Samuel. So this guy was clearly a black person. His title was, he was entitled Black Moor, but he was a Jew of Morocco. Christian thought, especially among Iberians, often equated Jews and blacks in a moral manner, so they put Jews and blacks together. 15th century Portuguese poet Alvaro de Brito Pestana explicated the term Morano in the following lines, punning on the general negative meaning of Negro. Okay, let's keep it moving. So we see that they were a dark-skinned people. The Portuguese and Spanish Sephardic stock were dark, swarthy people. These are black people. And I know the questions in your head, oh, black people, because when you read about these people, they had slaves and they had servants. Oh, they had servants? Well, we're going to get into that later and answer those questions that you may have. All right, we're going into Cape Verde, which is an island off the west coast of Africa, right? I'm going to read this. It says, even if the anti-Semitism of Spain and Portugal and the financial interests of the Portuguese crown were constantly trying to restrict their success, Jewish lancados played a central role in the economy and society because of their collaborative relation with African cultures and the fact that they had African wives. Their multiracial and multicultural identity contributed widely to the cultural linguistic mixture that constitutes the Cape Verdean Creole culture. In 1698, testimony of French traveler Lamar confirmed the intermixing of Jews with local population. The second generation being more mixed and superficially converted to Catholicism. Other than these three groups, there is one kind of Portuguese, mulattoes. People call them so because they have served them in the past and because they are descendants of the first inhabitants of this coast. From the Negro women that married mulattoes were born. Who were those mulattoes? Those Jews, those Portuguese and Spanish Jews. As they followed the religion of their former masters, they are part Jew, part Catholic, not more one than the other. Historically, Jews first came to the island of Sao Tiago during the Inquisition and were confined to a separate community in Praia. From the 19th century, other Jews of Moroccan origin joined this colony. There are still traces that are present in the village of Santo Antio, located on the northern coast, where a village named Synagoga evokes an ancient Jewish presence. A number of steles with Hebrew inscriptions discovered on Boa Vista and the Ponta de Sol cemeteries indicate Jews, probably immigrants from Morocco, lived in the island in the 19th century. Now, some of the descendants left after the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, leaving behind a mixed population with Jewish, Moroccan patronymics. Okay, so you can see that the Cape Verdeans have that strong relationship with those Spanish and Portuguese and Moroccan Jews that came over. Now, a lot of times we see all these synagogues being ruled by what? They send throughout all the country, they send white, Edomite, Caucasian, quote unquote Jews, which are fake Jews, they're not real Jews, to these different areas of the world to spread their BS and their corruption to our brothers and sisters across the world. Well, let's continue on. And these are quote unquote mulatto black people. Let's read. Let's keep going. This is Baruch Spinoza. He was a Portuguese Jew. We have a description on how he looked. It says he was of middle size. He had good features in his face. The skin somewhat black. Looking at somebody that look like Brad Pitt, his skin ain't somewhat black. Looking at somebody that look like Ethan Hawke, his skin is not somewhat black. Okay? That means brownish color or darkish color. That's how Baruch Spinoza, which is a renowned Jew, okay, a Portuguese Jew, okay, his skin, he was Negroid in his skin, okay? He had hue, he had color in his skin. He didn't look like the so-called, Israelis of today. All right? They said he had black curled hair, long eyebrows, and of the same color, so that one might easily know by his looks that he was descended from Portuguese Jews. When you seen a Jew, you saw he was black. You're like, oh, that's a Jew right there. Okay? Baruch Spinoza, and this is around 1655. Now, to your right, I have an image of synagogue in Dura, Syria, of the hand of God, a sacrifice on the altar, and you can clearly see black people standing on this mural. And I put pictures like this to put in your mind a black imagery. Because if you look up Baruch Spinoza, a white man going to come up. Why? Because the years of whitewash, Renaissance period. Like if you read about, I was watching Danielle. He was talking about Cromwell and how he got rid of all the original images of King James and the original images of the monarchs of England, and basically got them all repainted. And the crazy thing about it, if you look up these paintings of these monarchs or whatnot and famous people of England and Scotland, it'll tell you when the original painting was took and when the painting that you're looking at was made. And it'd be like a 4 or 5 year gap. Because why? They destroyed the original and remade it. You know, sometimes the truth is right in your face, man. It's right in your face. But let's continue on. This is Joseph Nassy. He lived 1904 to 1976. He was a black expatriate artist of Jewish descent, born Joseph Jonan Cosmo Nassy in Paramaribo, Suriname. He was descended on his father's side from Jews who had fled Spain during the Inquisition. And this is from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum because he lived through the Holocaust as well. Guess what? He was a product of the what? The Sephardic Jews that came over to Suriname, okay, interbred and had created posterity throughout that land. And what color was he? He was black. Okay, this is recent history, and he lived during the Holocaust period. He actually was in prison in one of the camps. This is a Sephardic Jew we're talking about, and again, you find people that say that this is his image as a black man, but there's no real ID on him. So I just put the description of him up, and to the right, you have a picture of black Jews, or what they call Saracens, fighting for Jerusalem. You know, which we know the Jews fought in the Moors' armies, right? Now, this scripture right here, remember what we read first. Let's go to the first slide again. A tradition exists with the Jewish community of Granada that they are from the inhabitants of Jerusalem, of the descendants of Judah and Benjamin, by Rabbi Abraham ben David. So they're Judah and Benjamin. So to the scripture, Deuteronomy 33 verse 7, about the Sephardic Jews. And this is the blessing of Judah. And he said, Hear, Lord, the voice of Judah, and bring him unto his people. Let his hands be sufficient for him, and be thou an help to him from his enemies. The Sephardic Jews, they were brought to their people because the people of Suriname are actually Israelites. The Indians and the Negroes that were brought over there as slaves, they were all Israelites, okay? And they were brought to their people, okay? To help them what? Retain their history. This is why the scripture says in Psalms 23 verse 5 that he will provide a table amongst our enemies. And that table is the tables of laws, our history, our knowledge, the tables of wisdom. Okay, and our cup going to run over, meaning with understanding. This is how our history was preserved, that we are the Israelites, through these Jews coming over here, all right, and keeping this thing alive. So it says, and this is the blessing of Judah, and he said, Hear, Lord, the voice of Judah, and bring him unto his people, and let his hands be sufficient for him, and be thou a help to him from his enemies. Okay, now to answer the question that y'all have, why did these Sephardic Jews have slaves if they were black? First of all, people don't look on color as the sole basis to have slaves. Let's get that out of the way. Secondly, you had plenty of Negro owners that had slaves. Antonio the Negro being the one I could think of off the top of my head. Okay, the brother that came with Hernan Cortez, Guerrero. Okay, he had slaves. Okay, and he was dark as night. Well, let's read this right here. I got this from the newobserveronline.com. It says, Fact 4, many free Negroes own black slaves. In fact, in numbers disproportionate to their representation in society at large. In 1830, a fourth of the free Negro slave masters in South Carolina owned 10 or more slaves. 8 owned 30 or more. According to the federal census reports on June 1st, 1860, there were nearly 4.5 million Negroes in the United States, with fewer than 4 million of them living in the southern slaveholding states. Of the blacks residing in the South, 261,98,000 were not slaves. Of this number, 10,689 lived in New Orleans. Black Duke University professor John Hope Franklin recorded that in New Orleans, over 3,000 free Negroes owned slaves, or 28% of the free Negroes in the city. In 1860, there were at least 6 Negroes in Louisiana who owned 65 or more slaves. So you see Negroes owning slaves, okay? The largest number, 152 slaves, were owned by the widow C. Richards and her son P.C. Richards, who owned a large sugarcane plantation. Another Negro slave magnate in Louisiana with over 100 slaves was Antoine Dubuclet, a sugar planter whose estate was valued in 1860 dollars, 264,000. In Charleston, South Carolina, 1860, 125 free Negroes owned slaves. 6 of them owned 10 or more of the 1.5 million in taxable property owned by free Negroes in Charleston. More than 300,000 represented slave holdings in North Carolina. 69 free Negroes were slave owners. The source, Black Masters, a free family of color in Old South, Michael P. Johnson and James L. Roque, New York, Norton, 1984. Okay? So these are historical records. You see people of color owning other people of color. Okay? So this is not a mystery or something mind-boggling. Our people were involved in the slave trade, and they were involved over here were owning slaves. Let's keep going. Okay, Amos 2 verse 6, it says, Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they sold the righteous for silver. So our own people sold and owned slaves, man, and the poor for a pair of shoes. Okay, you know, that's why we went into slavery. That's why we catching all this hell and turmoil, because we broke commandments and we partaked in the ways of the other nations. Okay. Now we do have a law about the Hebrew servant, but there's ways you have to treat them. Okay. You can't treat them like a bond servant or a slave, quote unquote. And which I'm gonna bring out about that slave. That word slave comes from the word slava, which means great, wonderful. Okay. It's been given a negative connotation throughout the years. But anyway, I brought this scripture out to show that we partook in our own downfall, basically. So with that, that was the Sephardic Jews, the history of Sephardic Jews after the expulsion, after they got kicked out of Portugal and in Spain. And I'm going to conclude the lesson there. Look up about the Suriname, the Jewish patrilineage of Jamaica, and you can clearly see that they have Israelite heritage. Cape Verde, and also in Mexico. I brought up in one of my prior videos about the Mexican synagogue that states claim that they are the descendants of Sephardic Jews. Okay, that came over and interbreded with them as well. Okay. So with that, I'm going to say shalom. I pray that you learn something and you grow from this lesson.